Vermont and possibly to Ontario Airport. However, I do understand that the funding is an issue. And as I struggled with the pros and cons of this issue, the solution just came to me, and that is that we fund the Gold Line with the cost savings that we will appreciate from an alternative to the 710 tunnel, which will not be a tunnel, but some other form of transportation system along that gap. And I would support that the Gold Line receive any cost savings which are realized by an alternative to a tunnel project for a 710 completion.
We accept that as a friendly amendment.
And I'm not sure that's a motion. I'm not making that as a motion, but in my mind, in my mind, we will have a resolution to the 710 issue, and I'm sure that we will realize some cost savings. I'm not ready to take the Prop C money at this point, but my eye is on additional funds for the Gold Line when they materialize.
All right, let me ask one final question. Will this amendment impact, how will it impact our Measure R funding? We talked about the Prop C. Will it impact our Measure R funding, which has been allotted to Azusa as opposed to Claremont?
Director Fasano.
The funding to Azusa has been allocated already.
Yes.
The project is defined in Claremont. I know about the arguments in Measure R. The CEO at the time stated the project would go to Claremont. The funding to this point has been just to Azusa, so there is a gap, and this is addressing an element of that gap.
Mr. Young, could you respond to that question?
As I understand the motion, it deals with Prop C 25% funds, not Measure R funds. And so it would not impact those funds.
Okay.
Okay, open the roll on the Supervisor Molina.
You know, I want us to understand what we're doing with these motions, although I probably will not be able to effectively communicate its understanding. This is about
Microphone.
This is about item number 12. These amendments are to a motion to hold what is put before us to find a way to contain ourselves. I think we all have dreams and aspirations, and we all have responsibilities of representing our own region. But I always say that when we come here as MTA, we have a regional responsibility and a duty to the voters.
It's item 70.
I'm sorry?
Item 70.
Now, sir, I want you to know that 70 is an amendment to 12.
Okay, go on.
I just wanted to make sure you understood that, okay? Because the issue of item number 12 is an issue about cost containment. Way back, I introduced a measure that I knew eventually would reach this day, and you'll see it over and over and over again, that when it comes to an opportunity or responsibility or a duty to figure out how you're going to pay for overruns, how you're going to pay for trimming and adding new items to these projects, that what's going to happen is what all MTA Board of Directors do, and that is borrow money from the future to pay or find those ways to cannibalize those projects at the end in order to pay today. If any of you have any responsibility to your own budgeting process, you know what will happen, and many people live this way, is that they overspend on their credit cards, they go down the line to live a life that they truly cannot afford, and at the end of the day find themselves in a very serious situation and usually don't own up to their responsibility of paying their debts. In this instance, we're on that pathway. Item 12 has enumerated a clear mechanism. It said very simply, let's look at the projects within our own region. We've gotten an allocation of so much money, whether it be under Measure R, under Prop C, and other funding opportunities, to take those dollars that are within that area within that region. And when in fact you have a cost overrun, or when in fact you are adding new things to your projects, that the only way to operate in a decent, honorable, responsible way is to look at your own projects and say, what is it that we're going to take from? Instead of saying, let's take from the future, because the future is going to need projects as well. And it's going to need tax dollars as well. And not only are there going to be infrastructure needs and regional needs at that time, there's going to be maintenance needs along the way, as well as how we're going to operate these things when we get there. Because there's no operational dollars once you build this as is, and we know that fares do not pay for all of the operational dollars. So item 12 was a measure to begin that cost containment decision-making before this board. And I appreciate Mr. Yale and all the staff work that has gone into it in putting forth a process. And they went through a process in each of these extensions, whether it be Crenshaw that is 160 million over, the I-5, 153 million over, the I-405, 75 million over, and the West Side Subway Extension, again, 177 million. As we go through it, they said, look at different criteria like value engineering. I don't know if you can value engineer anything to get rid of $160 million, but that's quite a feat. But they're going to look at those options. New local funding, let's see if we can find funding in other areas, maybe from some of the cities, some of the mayors that came up and spoke today, and see if they could put forth their funds in those areas in order to make these things happen. Maybe looking at opportunities to shorten the segmentation of it. Look at other quarter cost reductions that might be going on. And then of course you have to look at sub-regional cost reductions. And then, of course, there's the countywide cost reductions. Well, what is happening here is you have two motions, which are saying, screw that. We don't need to do that. Let's all aspire and dream to borrow from the future, to cannibalize the future, and to make irresponsible decisions now, because you're on your way to bankrupting this organization. We all would love to see all of this done. But right now, even the first step and the first process of saying, look at these items. You know, with all due respect to the South Bay, and I listened to the mayors and they were talking about being shortchanged and not having enough and so on. I remember sitting here and watching, while not a member at that time, when they were talking about the beginnings of the Green Line that goes exclusively through the South Bay, and the cost that was associated with all of that. I remember the very, I know Jackie Backrack is looking at me and going, you were here, man, you were here. And also the Long Beach Green Line at that time, both originating in the Blue Line, both originating in the South Bay. So again, we're not talking about a quarter that has not gotten its fair share of transit opportunities. So, but the issue is, I'm not saying take away from one and take away from another. I'm saying look within your own regions as to how to sort these things out. Mr. Yale and his staff put forth that kind of effort in trying to do that. But as you can see, this board ignoring me, this board is ignoring its responsibility to trying to find a path. Instead, saying, instead of doing what we should be doing, let's look at all these things. And if you'll see in those motions, they're saying, look for an opportunity to do this, look for options to do that. And it's interesting that those that are speaking against each other's motion are saying, it didn't exactly say that word. Well, it doesn't exactly say those words now. The reality is both of these motions are irresponsible. They should go back to their author. Those authors should make an effort to look within their own sub-region, as the original cost containment language said. Make tough decisions like we all should make, and try and figure out how to do it. But don't just talk about borrowing without taking away from your own projects. That's what you're not doing. Because at the end of the day, everybody's going to do that. Right now, you know, Supervisor Antonovich and Mr. Fasano have come up with their share, you know, Mr. Najarian wants to throw in a couple more. I'm sure all of us could do any which way to look at this differently. But unfortunately, what's going on here is not taking a responsible action. There's no doubt that some of us are not going to be serving here in the future when they start figuring out and sorting all of these issues. And I think at the end of the day, we all appreciate the kind of projects that are built on an ongoing basis. But we have to recognize and understand the reason that these projects are going on way over budget is that when they put these items together, even as they did in the original Measure R budget, is they weren't really looking at the issues of the reality of what these projects are going to cost. And that's been an ongoing problem at the MTA, and every single time, and it's basically, again, making an effort by many people here to disguise to the public what we're really spending when it comes to transit dollars. At the end of the day, it is the taxpayers who will pay and fund these decisions. It is going to be the transit riders that are going to be having those systems eliminated, not being able to maintain them and so on. This motion was put in seriously for cost containment purposes. I put it forth to my colleague in our very first effort to make that. Instead, we're saying, let's ignore those responsibilities, let's not look at it now. We're going to take it away from these other areas and let's look in the future for new opportunities, new options, new borrowing mechanisms, and those kinds of ways to try and solve these issues. I can't say I blame them completely, but at the same time, let's honestly, this is not the way to go. We haven't even had a presentation of item 12 before it is totally amended and taken on a very irresponsible track.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Fasano.
If I have your concurrence, I would ask that our motion be withdrawn and ask that a report come back in 60 days with the requested information on how funding might be made available for goal line, areas that would address phase 2B. You ask to report back.
Oh, you make that part of the item that we're voting on, that will be a report back. So then it'll be a report back, which is a part of the amendment.
So report back only, no funding allocation.
With a report back in 30 days. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let us.
Can I just ask